next two guests witness firsthand the daily battles between the president and the media. Let's bring in White House correspondent for Reuters, Jeff Mason, and the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, Sagar and Jetty. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us, Shannon.
All right, I want to play a little bit more about what the president had to say about all of us tonight. Here's what he said.
These are just dishonest, terrible people. I'm telling you that. Terrible people. Not all of them. Honestly, not all of them. I'd say 85%.
Are we in the 15%? I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure.
How's the mood these days, Jeff, over at the White House?
Well, there's frustration that there hasn't been a briefing in a while, and that was just mentioned previously. I think it's true that we're still getting some opportunities to ask questions of President Trump, and that is good, but we always want more access and more ability to ask questions because there is no dearth of news going on right now.
Yes, absolutely. All right, here's a little bit of what the vice president had to say about how the president plays with the media and with the American public.
All I know is for a lot of the liberals in the national media, they met their match in President Donald Trump. He understands that. Look, the American people elected this man because he had a right vision for this country, but also because he's a fighter.
Sagar, does it somehow benefit both sides in some way? I mean, the president loves having an opponent, no matter who it is. Right now, it's the media. He loves that back and forth. But there are some on the media side that are becoming sort of celebrities in their own right because of their constant warring with the president.
Yeah, that's not necessarily incorrect, but it's unfortunate on both sides, as you kind of point out, in that it can be played up for ratings. And the president loves to point that out. He'll say, you know, they are my least favorite fans, but when you get ratings, you can say anything. I believe he said that tonight. And so it is a back and forth relationship in which might be mutually beneficial, but it's unfortunate because it's what we end up talking about when there's so much else going on.
Okay, I want to read a little bit from media analyst Jeffrey McCall. He says this: the journalistic world can't be using unnamed sources who have a reason to be playing the reporters. And when stories fall apart, news organizations need to be big enough to acknowledge human errors. CNN's refusal to sort this story out in front of the public lends support to the right-leaning critics who suggest CNN's more about pushing an anti-Trump agenda than getting stories to be factually correct. This is the back and forth about Lanny Davis, Michael Cohen's attorney, being a source and that kind of thing. Does it lend more to these critics on the right, Jeff, if there's not complete transparency about exactly how things went down?
Well, a couple things. One, absolutely. If a news organization gets something wrong, if I as a reporter get something wrong, if my colleagues get something wrong, we have a responsibility to correct that. That's just a core value of journalism, for sure. Regarding the issue of anonymous sources, though, it is very difficult to work in this town without people talking to journalists who request anonymity, and that includes sources at the White House, including people who are paid spokespeople. Yeah. They will often say to reporters, I'll say that on background, which means not attributable to me as a spokesperson or not attributable to my name. I, as a reporter, always prefer to have an on-the-record quote, and I think that is what we should strive for, but it's not always possible.
Yeah, and what becomes tricky is if I have something and I've got it from an anonymous source, and another one of my coworkers has something from an anonymous source, and we can't tell each other who those sources were, you know, Sagar, you run into the possibility that you're working from the same well.
Yes, and I think part of the issue is that we kind of run amok in the use of anonymous sources here in D.C. because it's much easier whenever we'll say, okay, we'll just put it on background. And we don't spend enough time fighting to put people on the record because it's much easier to maintain a source relationship. They don't want to put their names out there and own a story, and it's our job as journalists to push them as hard as we possibly can to go on the record.
I also think, though, it's important for public figures, certainly if you're criticizing the use of anonymous sources, to encourage the people who you are working with or who work for you to go ahead and speak on the record.
This is true. We'd all like that. Jeff and Sagar, thank you both very much. The Trump-backed candidates score important wins in primaries. He's got a good record on that. Republican Ron DeSantis calls the president the 800-pound gorilla in Republican politics. Nobody, DeSantis says, is more influential in actually motivating voters to get to the polls. So now we see the president pushing for Republican Mike Braun in Indiana. Will it be enough to flip a key Senate seat from blue to red? Let's ask Fox News politics Senator Chris Stirewalt. He is here with analysis. Good evening.
Madam.
The president very fired up in Indiana, as we often see him. But what I find interesting is that both of the Senate candidates, Democrat and Republican, in this race have embraced the president. In fact, we've got a little bit of a clip from the Democrats' campaign ad.
Fact is, Joe Donnelly works hard for Hoosiers, joining with President Trump to build a wall and protect our borders.
So it sounds like both of them are going Trump-tastic.
Well, and in Indiana, they need to. This is a very Republican state. Look, Indiana has gone, I believe, twice, essentially, since the New Deal for a Democratic nominee. This is one of the most Republican states. Mike Pence was the governor. Joe Donnelly should be dead meat by any rights, but he has one advantage. Nobody knows or nobody knew who Mike Braun is. Now, that's allowed him to win the Republican nomination because there were two congressmen running. Incumbency
snuck up in there.
Incumbency is in bad odor. So the guy that nobody knew sounded better than the two people nobody liked. He managed to slip through. That's fine in the primary. In the general, that's a problem. And what limited polling there is in the race said that Donnelly was in good shape. But now Braun is getting famous, and nothing is going to get him as famous as cheaply and effectively as having the president come in. And this is always the funny part about the Trump stuff. So I hate the news media. They're filthy dogs. They're caged animals.
Oh, we're going to talk
blah,
about that, too. He had plenty to say tonight.
Blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, but the coverage that generates is what's going to help Mike Braun. And this rally will be a huge help for Mike Braun, if only for the fact that every newspaper, every television outlet in Indiana is going to say Mike Braun's name 55 bajillion times and put his image on television, and it's going to get his name identification up, because all he needs in this race is for it to revert to type, for the Republican voters in Indiana to vote for Republicans, Democrats to vote for Democrats, and he'll win by 15 points.
Very interesting. Now, last night there was a Democrat debate in New York, and got a little raucous and feisty at some times. Now, Cynthia Nixon, the actress who's running against Cuomo, polling for her is terrible. Although she knows she's made up some ground, it's a tough road to hoe. This is what the New York Times says. Polls have shown Miss Nixon trailing badly, but her team believes they do not reflect the real political climate among Democratic voters, pointing to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's shocking defeat of Representative Joe Crowley in New York City in June, and more recently, the nomination of Andrew Gillum, who ran as an unabashed progressive for governor of Florida on Tuesday. Any big surprises coming in New York in that primary, the Democrat side?
If only Buffalo looked just like the Bronx. If Buffalo looked just like the Bronx, then yes, she could have an Ocasio-Cortez moment. But there are Democrats, I hate to break it to the Nixon campaign, there are Democrats outside of New York City, in New York. She is very liberal, very, very liberal. And so she's out of step in that way. What she has done, though, is effectively terminate Cuomo's ambitions for the future. She has shown him up to be what he is, which is a massively overrated political talent. This is a guy who we for years heard how good he is. That debate, he was redonkulous. That was horrible.
One of my favorite words.
It was and we remember back to America was never that great, blah 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 blah. So she has pantsed him in the public space.
At least moving forward. All right, Chris, how do you really feel? You always let us know. You never have to worry where you stand, because you know, Chris. All right, good to see you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Well, President Trump is ripping CNN again, and also taking some new shots at the folks at NBC. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, has a fair and balanced look with specifics.
I saw a piece on NBC today. NBC, not just CNN. CNN's the worst.
President Trump escalated his attacks on two networks today by condemning CNN President Jeff Zucker and NBC News Chairman Andy Lack, taking the unprecedented step of declaring both executives should be fired. The backdrop is CNN standing by a report that former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen believes the president had advanced knowledge of the 2016 Trump Tower meeting with a Russian lawyer. Although Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, who tells Fox News he spoke to CNN off the record but did not confirm the allegation, calls the story false. The president accused CNN of hatred and extreme bias and denounced Zucker, a one-time friend when both worked at NBC, by addressing CNN's new parent company. Little Jeff Z has done a terrible job. His ratings suck, and AT&T should fire him to save credibility. CNN hit back. Make no mistake, Mr. President, CNN does not lie. We report the news, and we report when people in power tell lies. CNN stands by our reporting and our reporters. One of those reporters on the story, Jim Sciutto, a former Obama administration official. Another is Carl Bernstein of Watergate fame, who has accused Trump of a malignant presidency.
What we are watching in the Trump presidency is worse than Watergate.
Bernstein said no taunt would diminish his lifelong mission of bringing the truth to light. The president mocked NBC's Lack in suggesting, based only on rumors, the good news is that Andy Lackey is about to be fired, for incompetence and much worse. He said NBC was hurt badly when anchor Lester Holt got caught fudging my tape, in which Trump tied James Comey's dismissal to the Russia probe.
Regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it.
But there is no credible allegation of improper editing by NBC, which posted the full tape online. The president also took a shot at fake books about him that are pure fiction. Perhaps he was anticipating next month's book by Bernstein's one-time colleague Bob Woodward, which is called Fear. Brett?
Howie, thanks. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Peter Ducey tells us the president's been working over Sessions supporters in the Senate. We'll tell you what that means. But we start with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts with the news headlines from this latest interview from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. As has been known to happen from time to time here at the White House, some late-breaking headlines from the president in that interview with Bloomberg. First of all, about the Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg, who was granted immunity to testify to prosecutors from the Southern District of New York. President Trump told Bloomberg that he believes that Weisselberg did not betray him when he was speaking to prosecutors, saying that the time period that he was talking about in regard to the Cohen investigation was only for a limited period of time. The president adding that Weisselberg is, quote, a wonderful guy. You mentioned this, that the president also said his attorney general's job, Jeff Sessions' job, is safe until after the midterm elections. Asked what might happen after the midterm elections, the president did not comment. The president also said that he would consider pulling the United States out of the World Trade Organization if it didn't shape up. He said that a deal with Canada on NAFTA is close and reiterated that a deal from the European Union on cars is not enough to satisfy him. Fox News had reported that earlier in the day.
Today's Democrat Party is held hostage by left-wing haters, angry mobs, deep state radicals, establishment cronies, and their fake news allies. Our biggest obstacle and their greatest ally actually is the media. You can believe it. We've got stories that are so big and the media doesn't pick them up. We have stories that if that was about a Republican or a conservative, it'd be front page of every newspaper. And we have them, and they just don't want to write them. It's a dishonest group of people. I will tell you that. You can have the biggest story about Hillary Clinton. I mean, look at what she's getting away with. But let's see if she gets away with it. Let's see. All I can say this, our Justice Department and our FBI at the top of each, because inside they have incredible people, but our Justice Department and our FBI have to start doing their job and doing it right and doing it now. Because people are angry. People are angry. What's happening is a disgrace. And at some point, I wanted to stay out, but at some point, if it doesn't straighten out properly, I want them to do their job. I will get involved, and I'll get in there if I have to. Disgraceful. And the whole world is watching, and the whole world gets it, and the whole world understands exactly what's going on.
There was a lot going on all day, and it started early. The feud between the president and the news media who cover him reached a new peak, or maybe valley. It began with a tweet storm early from the West Wing, the barrage, 6:50 a.m. when it started. The first tweet read this way: "The hatred and extreme bias of me by CNN has clouded their thinking and made them unable to function. But actually, as I've always said, this has been going on a long time. Little Jeff Z has done a terrible job. His ratings suck, and AT&T should fire him to save credibility." Little Jeff is a reference to Jeff Zucker, who is 5'6" and runs CNN. 12 minutes later, the president continued this way, quote, "What's going on at CNN is happening to different degrees at other networks, with NBC News being the worst. The good news is that Andy Lackey is about to be fired for incompetence and much worse. When Lester Holt got caught fudging my tape on Russia, they were hurt badly." In a third tweet, the president wrote that he, quote, "cannot state strongly enough how totally dishonest much of the media is. Truth doesn't matter to them. They have only their hatred and agenda. This includes fake books, which come out on me all the time, always anonymous sources, and are pure fiction. Enemy of the people." In a subsequent tweet, the president noted that CNN, quote, "is working frantically to find their source. Look hard because it doesn't exist. Whatever was left of CNN's credibility is now gone." The reference to the source, of course, is to an apparently fraudulent CNN story that claimed the president was aware of the now famous Russia lawyer meeting at Trump Tower before it took place. Laney Davis, the lawyer representing Michael Cohen, now concedes he was the source of the story, and he admits he has no evidence it's actually true. That's bad for CNN, obviously. CNN, for its part, has refused comment on its own dishonesty. Mark Stein is a best-selling author and a genius at sorting things out, and he joins us to do that. Mark, you saw the tweet storm? Your response?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always a good idea, Tucker, when the president gets the media talking about themselves. I saw Howard Kurtz earlier, and Howard's analysis makes sense in media terms, but I think out in the wider world, the reality is that the media people loathe the media, even more than politicians, and they especially loathe the media when they're talking about themselves. So if you can get Carl Bernstein talking pompously and ponderously about how he has spent, whatever it is, 60 years, quote, bringing the truth to light, unquote, while he's summering at Sag Harbor, which I gather is like Sag Harbor is some broken down old lobsterman's decrepit village somewhere way up the coast nobody's ever heard of. But anyway, Carl Bernstein's summering at Sag Harbor, announcing that he's bringing the truth to light. Every time you can get the media to stand on their own portentousness, then I think that's a win for the president.
But is it, though? Because there's nothing that the press likes to talk about more than itself. I mean, this is self-involvement on parade. I mean, this is like free therapy for most reporters who need it. So I mean, everybody wins, it seems like.
Well, yes, but I think actually, I think this is one thing where people do agree with him, that they feel the media do not actually give him a fair shake. So actually, for example, everyone's saying, oh, no, there was nothing wrong with that NBC thing. There was nothing wrong with it, except that it's one of those over-edited interviews in which the bits they take out are as revealing as anything they leave in. And the president has a point on that. And I think it's actually very reasonable to raise the way these things are edited and why they're edited in that way. As for the Lanny Davis thing, I understand Lanny Davis thrice denied he was the source for the CNN story. When I first heard the CNN story, I thought it was rubbish because Michael Cohen is now being forced to lie about everything he's been doing for the previous quarter century. So the government star witness is a liar whose deal is conditional on these new lies. So I thought Lanny Davis was just passing on his client's lies, but in fact he's lying about what the liar lied to him about that day. So it's actually, even by CNN media source standards, it's falling apart, that one.
It's meta lying. So I mean, you're old enough, like me, to remember a time when political analysts said things like, what American voters really want is authenticity and transparency in their politics. Here we have a president who's literally tweeting in his bedroom early morning saying things like, CNN sucks. Now, that's the most authentic and transparent thing a president has ever done, and yet the media hate it.
Well, that's right, because this isn't the way a president behaves. What he's supposed to do is he's supposed to, his minders are supposed to focus group CNN sucks, for 6 weeks, and then a spokesman will come out at a podium and read out a press release saying that CNN sucks. The fact that he wakes up and thinks that CNN sucks, and then he goes, CNN sucks. He's not doing it right, and they can't stand that. And you're right. This is actually, you can complain about a lot of things, but this is like actually being plugged into Trump's brain when he wakes up in the morning, and they can't. And after asking for unfiltered, authentic politicians who aren't in the bubble, this guy isn't in the bubble. He's out of the bubble, taking the tire iron to them, and they can't stand it.
It's hilarious. I have so many mixed feelings about all this. But I will say, I agree with you. I will never again sit and listen to some pompous guy on TV say, what voters really want is authenticity. Voters may want it. The media doesn't. Mark Steyn, great to see you.
Oh,
as always.
Thanks, Tucker. You've spent years bringing the truth to light, too. We should all talk pompously like Carl Bernstein.
What a fraudulent character. Thank you, Mark.
Nice.